Good morning, Jolo. I'm just gonna be up in a minute. Alrighty, it looks like we're up. Did I remember to turn my microphone on? I did. Good job, Michael. Alright, good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are. I'm back to work on the game engine. Yesterday we got some progress done on the scene editor. We implemented a control scheme that doesn't mess with the game layers control scheme. So to demonstrate, I'll open up a 2D scene. We can now right-click and drag. The editor traps the mouse when you do that, and you can use the arrow keys to move around. And this is, we'll have to add a whole bunch of configurability options for the final version of this. But just for the sake of being able to see what's in the scene while we are working on it, this is good enough. I'm using hot constants for the controls. Let's open up the scene view here. So this is the code that actually does the camera controls and displays the scene. And hot constants is the library I have for dynamically reloading constant values without having to think too hard about it. So basically, I just can pop in while I'm playing and change the cam speed to 10, and then suddenly the cam speed is way faster because of the reloading code. But yeah, there was also some other changes which I'll cover in a minute. What are some things that you recommend for me to try to program to learn C++? Ooh, that's I don't know, man. I don't have too many good recommendations for just starting out. Obviously, I would, say start with console apps. That's the easiest structure to understand when it comes to programming in C++. Is that you have a main function. The main function does something, and then it returns when you're finished. By its very nature, windowed applications like this are much more complicated. But once you understand the fundamentals, you can move on from there. But I wouldn't spend too long working on little console apps because they're boring. And you want to be doing something that engages you. So yeah, I don't know. I might not be the best person to ask about that because I didn't really learn C++ the classical way, and the route I went took like 10 years. So don't be like me. But anyway, yeah. Let me maximize this. I did a little bit of work on this yesterday. So one of the outstanding problems yesterday was the problem that right-clicking inside of the window didn't focus it, and now it does. I'll quickly cover how I did that. I actually brought some of that code back to the game view. So now, if I left-click, if I left-clicked, the game view would always come into focus. You can see the tab light up. But now it'll also light up when I click the middle mouse button or the right mouse button. And that's different from how all the other windows in your IMGUI work. Normally right-clicking and middle-clicking don't change focus, only the left-click does. So let's cover how I made that change, just in case this becomes useful to somebody. So the first thing was that I realized I don't actually need window focus to do input on the scene view. All I need to do is know that I've clicked within the range of the scene view. So that's done down here. I've got this system set up where I have a Boolean which marks whether the window should be focused, and then at the start of each frame, if it's marked for focus, I tell IMGUI to focus it. This might be a little bit of a weird, it might look like a weird workaround for what I'm trying to do, because IMGUI does have a function called set window focus, where you can literally just say the window that we are updating right now, let's focus it. However, I decided to not use it. Excuse me. I decided to not use it because if we go to the IMGUI header, where this is declared, if we wait the 5 to 10 seconds it takes for VS Code to find it, we have this note that says not recommended. Set current window to be focused topmost. Prefer using set next window focus. So I'm not exactly clear on the reasoning behind this, but it appears that the system works better if you say set next window focus, and then IMGUI knows from the get-go that the next window that you start should be focused. So I decided to do this. It does mean that there's a 1 frame delay from when I set a window for focus to be when it is focused, but that's acceptable to me. And then inside of the actual window code, we calculate the bounding area, and then we immediately create the invisible button that covers the span here. And instead of checking to see whether the window is focused, we check to see whether the button's been clicked with the right mouse button. This itself doesn't actually mean doesn't actually have the trappings of mouse button clicking GUI button clicking in IMGUI. It's literally just checking whether the mouse is clicked and the cursor is over the button, which is what I want in this case, but I just want to be crystal clear that this is not the same thing as checking whether you've clicked a button. And basically, if we've right-clicked within the bounds of the area, we set is trapped to true, we set mark for focus to true, and then we get the cursor position at the time of the click. And to be crystal clear, this will only fire once, because is mouse clicked returns only when on the frame that you clicked down. If you're holding the button, that's a different API call. But anyway, this will mark the frame as trapping. If you've let go of the mouse button, then it'll mark it as untrapped. If we take a look at the controls following that, it depends on whether we're trapped. If we are trapped, then we will set the cursor to be blank, so we don't have a visible arrow. We set the mouse cursor position using the API call that we set up yesterday. So that way, if it's moved, if you've moved the mouse cursor since the last frame, it will move right back to where it was. And then from there, we use the raw mouse delta that we got from the raw input API, and we use that alongside the ASWD keys to be able to set up the camera rotation and all of that, and actually deal with camera motion. And then learning what I learned from the scene view, I did a few changes to the game view that weren't very hard. Basically, we brought in the marked for focus system where we can set the game view to be focused. And then inside of the window code for it, we did a similar trick where we check to see whether we've clicked with the middle or right mouse button on the invisible button region. So So on this one, instead of saying is item clicked, I used is item hovered, and I checked whether the right or the middle mouse buttons were clicked. Which, as you recall, when we looked at the source code for the scene view, the is clicked item literally just concatenates or logically ands the is item hovered and is mouse clicked. So I just did the same thing, except for I'm checking one of two mouse buttons. And if you've clicked with the right or middle mouse button, marker focus is set for true. And then on the very next frame, the game view comes into focus. And that's really all that needed to change here. Cool. But yeah, the system's a lot better. It's a lot more stable too. So if I was to right click outside of the window and try and drag in, nothing happens. If I right click within the window and drag out really fast, I don't have the chance of losing track of the mouse. It'll always be inside of the window. And it seems to be just really stable. Yeah, and there was only one more other change to review that I did off stream yesterday, and that had to do with the time system. And I'm kind of on the fence about how long I'm going to use this solution. I decided to get rid of the editor side time system and just start using the time system from the engine layer. But it's got some potential problems. Let's go to runtime.cpp. Take a look at the editor. Take a sip of water. All right. So in the editor layer here, if we take a look at, I scrolled right past it, run, this is our new run loop. It's basically the same as the old run loop, except for we are now using input update to deal with the raw mouse accumulator, because we need that raw mouse delta for camera control inside of the scene view. So talking about time, inside of the scene view, we needed to use the time for the ASWD key speed. So if we take a look at scene.cpp, heading back to the section where we do the camera controls, this is what we were using the delta time for. Basically, we would increment the excuse me, gassy today. We would increment the camera position by the axis formed by the opposing direction keys, the A and D key on opposite sides of the x-axis and so on, multiplied by the camera speed, which is a constant up above, multiplied by speed boost, which is whether or not you're holding down the shift key. You can, while you're holding down the shift key, it'll double speed. Multiplied by delta time, multiplied by the direction vector of that axis. Now the delta time here, it's a little, the way that it's timed is a little problematic for me, from my perspective. So as we were talking about yesterday, all of the enterprise systems are stepped within this single call. So this is the loop of the editor. We do the editor stuff. We do input update, window start frame, scene editor draw, EP runtime run, and then the window end frame. Everything except for EP runtime run is editor code. And then inside of the EP runtime run, that's where we actually update the time system. We go to, it's the first thing it does. We go to time update, and then we get the raw ticks from the system using query performance counter on Windows and using Mac absolute time on Mac OS. And from there, we calculate how much time the previous frame took. And in the context of a game, that makes sense because this is the first code that's executed after the previous frame presents. However, in the editor, that's no longer the case. We do everything the editor does before we invoke EP runtime run. which means that this code, which might take a variable length of time itself, will interfere with EP runtime run's picture of when the frame started. And I'm not a huge fan of that. In fact, I'm not actually a huge fan of variable time steps to begin with. But I think it's probably good enough now to work from. I had considered, and I had done some tests with this, I had considered moving the runtime call to be the first thing that happens inside of the editor's runtime loop. And I can do that, and that, makes it so that the time system is updated first thing after the run loop finishes. But there's a problem there too, and I'll demonstrate that real quick. I'll open up a 2D scene, hit play on play mode, and then I'll undock the game view and watch what happens when I resize. Until I'm finished resizing, the screen goes black, and that's because the scene editor draw handles resizing of the frame buffer that we're rendering to. So if we do runtime run before we do all the editor stuff, it's possible for us to render to the frame buffer from the game code, then have it erased when we resize the frame buffer during the editor code. So to get rid of that flickering problem, we kind of have to have EP runtime run take place after scene editor draw. And it kind of sucks, but that's the way it is. If we were to do anything else, then we'd be talking about that flickering issue returning. Because like if we moved it down below, so EndFrame is where we wait for the next frame. In terms of the loop, it's essentially equivalent to doing what we just did, because once this returns, we go to the message pump and then we go back to EP runtime run, and that's, yeah, it's not great. We're gonna have to eventually come back and touch on frame rate management anyways, because I want frame rates to be stable on systems where we don't have variable display refresh rates. And by that I mean the delta time shouldn't vary by more than one frame refresh period. There's no reason to, because you want each frame to progress time by the same duration as your display. But unless you have one of the, like a VSync monitor or what's it called, the ones that have the variable refresh rate, G-Sync I think is what it's called. Unless you have one of those, usually you'll have a frame rate that's very consistent. And there's no reason for you to be off by however many fractions of a second, if you can just set the update rate to be the same as the monitor. But yeah, that's a problem for tomorrow, Michael. Today we're not dealing with that. All right, cool. We'll just make sure that we're running again. Good, and then when we run play in editor, you'll see that when we resize, we no longer have that flickering. All right, so this is a pretty stable system we've got going. It's stable enough that I went ahead and posted the code to GitHub. So now GitHub has a copy of this scenario. The next thing to look at would be to actually do stuff inside of the scene view. We can move the camera around, and that's going to be enough for the moment when we're actually clicking and dragging inside of the scene view. We'll deal with mouse picking stuff later. I think the next thing to work on would be the hierarchy view. And I don't really have a plan how to approach this yet. This is a mock-up, what you're looking at here. Basically, we just have a panel with nested lists. And I was thinking that when I was kind of blocking out the editor layout, this is kind of the scenario I was imagining, was that you'd have an entity, you'd have a list of its components underneath. And I think I kind of largely like that, but we're going to want to take another look at possibilities. So like we've done for the last couple of streams, I'm going to go ahead and open up Unity again, because I quite like the way that Unity arranges its UI. And we're going to compare what it does versus what we want to do. And we're also going to be taking a look at the way that IMGUI itself allows you to do stuff, because there's a whole bunch of goodies inside of IMGUI that we can use. Yeah, let's open up a simple Unity project. And because it's Unity, even though it's a super simple project, it's going to take 3 years to open. So while that's running, let's take a look at some of the stuff that we can do with IMGUI. Okay, so we can change the color of text. That's nice. Word wrapping, UTF-8 text, bullets, collapsing headers. This is something we might want to have. So in my original list, I put it like this, where it's just a line of text. This kind of looks pretty nice though, if we have a bar going across like a header for every entity. It kind of helps delineate which things are components and which things are entities. Yeah, I kind of like that. At the very least, I need them to be collapsible. So what we've got here is probably fine. Okay, and then you have the option to select items in here. That is probably wise. I don't currently have that set up inside of my mockup hierarchy. So I guess for the moment, we'll probably want to copy this, the selection state single selection example, where the header is going to be the name of the entity, and then you can select an item inside. And then when you select an item inside, that'll appear in the inspector. Which the inspector is gonna be a challenge, because we don't have C# reflection the way that Unity does. We have to invent our own reflection system. Oh, is Unity finished loading? Okay, finally. So this is just a simple scene with Unity. This is Unity's version of the hierarchy. I'll put it on the right side here, make it a little bit bigger. So this is I'll do the inspector and the hierarchy like this, like that. So this is just a simple little scene. It's got a player boy with it's a capsule with a nose, and I threw on a player controller script on it, specifically just to do simple third-person movement. We've got tracking cam, which is Cinemachine camera stuff, has a separate object and whatever. We've got a wind system, which is just an empty object with a wind script on it. It's actually, the wind script itself does something kind of neat. It has arrows on it to tell you how strong the wind is and in which direction it's going. But yeah, the way that this works is basically you can select an entity, and all of the components are listed inside of the inspector, not inside of the hierarchy. That might be the way I want to do it too, actually. Because, I don't know, it might be useful to be able to glance at the hierarchy and see which entities have which components. But on the other hand, it might be straightforward just to see which entities are nested under which other entities. So I tell you what, today let's not worry about components. Let's just get the hierarchy working for entities, because entities all have the transform component, and we can simply confirm that that's working by modifying transform components inside of the inspector panel. So yeah, let's take a look at selection state. I'm going to use the selection state single selection example and then not do nesting quite yet. We will get the entities to work inside of the hierarchy in the inspector one by one first, and then we'll worry about parenting one entity to another. Okay, seems like a plan. So let's search for selection state single selection inside of the IMGUI code. Single selection. Yeah, selection state. Single selection. And we need to search inside of the vendor filter. There it is. So this is the code that gave us this section of the demo window. So it looks like we have an IMGUI tree node. And if it returns true, then we do a for loop. And we enter IMGUI selectables. Okay. So in our case, we don't actually need to do the tree node. All we need to do is to present these IMGUI selectables. And when we do that, we pass in a label, C string basically, a Boolean indicating whether it's selected. And then there's options for flags and size, which we can leave at their basic. Cool. Let's stop debugging. Let's take a look at the, this time around we're going to be looking at the hierarchy view, which I haven't looked at since I started with mocking up the window. And so we're going to change first. We're going to remove this whole tree node thing. And we're going to work, strictly speaking, with the IMGUI selectables. So we're going to need to track. We're going to need to have some global state. So I think at this point we should look at a more robust way for me to track the state of the program. Let's take a look at the header for scene editor. So this is the collection of functions and things that the scene editor view uses, or scene editor layout, I should say, uses. We can add an extern. I guess it would be an entity ID. So for this, we'll include enterprise / scene manager. We'll have an EP scene manager entity ID. Come on. Come on, IntelliSense. That's interesting. It's not giving me that option. Is entity ID global? I thought it was part of the, oh, I guess it's global. I thought it was part of the enterprise namespace. I may want to change that, but for now I'll just do it like this. So we have an extern entity ID and we'll have selected entity. Hey, what's up? What's up? We're doing some more fun things today than we did yesterday. For the moment, I'm just going to use, I'm just going to pretend like you can only select one entity at one time. We will probably need to implement multiple entity selection after that, but this is just for the sake of getting the ball rolling. Inside of the hierarchy, I will actually do the defining of this extern. Actually, no, this should be inside of the scene editor.cpp. Just trying to establish some kind of organization while I'm working. Here we go. Equals 0. I think 0 is a null SCID, but I can't quite remember actually. Do I have an identifier for a null entity? Okay, we don't actually use a nullable entity ID, so that might be a problem actually. What I could do is I could use the maximum value of the type def, which is a size t. So an entity ID is a uint64t, meaning that it's unsigned. If I was to pass in a -1, what'll happen is it'll do an integer underrun, and it'll instead of being -1, which you can't represent inside of an unsigned type, it'll actually wrap around to the very end and give you the maximum value, which is well out of range. For the moment, I think this is fine, but I may need to actually go back in and double check that I can do a nullable entity ID situation inside of the scene manager. But for now, I'll just do it like this. And now, when we go into the hierarchy, we should be able to access it. So let's do include layouts / scene editor.h, and we can now inside of here access which is selected. So how should we do that? Well, first we're going to need to get a list of all of the entities that are in the scene. So we'll need to do an include on enterprise for the scene manager, moving that towards the top, and then in scene manager, we're going to need to add a way for us to gain access to that information. Presently, the way that entities are stored is they're stored inside of a static structure inside of, or static container inside of scene manager.cpp. So these are the serialization functions for systems. Here's the struct that represents entities, and here's the entity pool. We have a list of entity indices, which correspond an entity ID with a element index of the pool. We need a way to gain access to this information, specifically the list of entity IDs that are inside of the entity indices map. So how should we do that? I'm trying to think of a way. If we go to scene editor or scene manager.h, I'm trying to think of an idea where I can get access to that information in the editor layer without exposing it to the game code layer. Well, you picked ECS versus traditional object hierarchy composition. I'm not sure what it's called, like UE. Well, that's maybe a little, that might be fuzzing the borders a little bit, because UE kind of does both, from what I understand. I haven't spent a huge amount of time in UE. I know that they use traditional hierarchy, like inheritance structure for a lot of their basic things, like actors, for example, or character entities. They like, anything that's inside of the scene has to be based off of an actor or whatever. But from what I understand, a lot of systems will do ECS style things, where a system will just maintain its own memory separate from the actors, if I understand correctly. And again, it's not like I've shipped a game in Unreal Engine or anything like that, so this is my outsider's understanding. So there are places inside of Unreal, I believe, where they do ECS style. And in case somebody else is watching that doesn't understand what we're talking about here, ECS style is it stands for entity component system. It's a paradigm where your entities don't actually contain any behaviors. They just contain like a list of which components they're connected to, or sometimes they don't even do that. And in my case, they don't even do that. Then you have components which still don't contain any behaviors. They just contain data relative to a behavior that you want the entity to exhibit. And then you have systems which are only behavior. They operate on the data contained within the components, and they do that for all the components all at once. And it tends to be, in the general case, it tends to be more performant, and it tends to be more flexible than inheritance-based stuff, which is, and I'm talking in the general case. Like, this is not something that you can apply to every problem. The inheritance side is where instead of doing it that way, instead of composing your objects by adding data bundles, these components to your entities, and then having those be operated on by separate systems, it's basically just like what they teach you in C++ 101, where you have a base class. You want that behavior to be extensible. You base a class on it, and then you add your extended behaviors and extended data to the derived class, and so on. My personal feeling is that that's too inflexible for games. I think games really should favor a compositional approach, no matter how it's implemented. And you can kind of mix and match. Like, if you take a look at how Unity does it, technically speaking, what you have here is a compositional approach. However, it's not ECS. It is EC. So ECS, they've recently added a thing in the data-oriented tech stack, the dots for Unity. That's actually ECS. But out of the box, Unity has this thing where you can make an entity, and then you attach a behavior to it using a mono behavior. Most of the time, it's a mono behavior, or you can add a component that works out of the box. And the way that like things like mono behaviors work is that component contains both the data that's necessary for that behavior, and it also includes the behavior code, and you're linking those together. And that means that it's not ECS, it's just EC. ECS means that the component just has the data, and then some other system will iterate through all the components later on. It's my preference to do it the ECS way, because just to recycle Unity's moniker for the dots for data-oriented tech stack, it's performance by default. I just don't see why I should build my house on quicksand. This is what I'm thinking. You can totally make systems approachable, and that's my goal here, is to make it so that somebody who's making a game in my engine, they'll be encouraged to, and they'll find it easy to make a system and make new component types, and have those be as performant as the native types, if that makes sense. Long-winded answer for a seemingly simple question, but good question. All right, where were we? So I need a way for the editor to gain access to the entity IDs that are in the scene. And at the same time, I don't know if I want those to be exposed to the game layer. But you know, maybe on the other hand, maybe I do. Maybe there's a situation where a game developer would want the full list of every single entity in the scene. Probably not though. Probably they'll just want to get a list of a subset of them. We do have a thing called query component functions, which basically is a way for you to ask a given system for all of the entity IDs that have one of that system's components attached. That's not really in use yet. That's just there because I knew we were going to need it in the future. But you know what? Yeah, I'm going to add a global function. This is probably one that you probably won't want to use at all in your game code, but you never know. There's not a huge amount of reasons why I should keep it private. So let's add. Well, let's find a spot for it first. We have get entity position, get entity rotation, get entity scale. Is entity valid? Get entities with component. Above get entities with component, I'm going to say API static, and we'll get a stdVector of entity IDs, and this will be get all entities. Just bar none. It doesn't take any parameters. It just gives you the full list of everything. And then for this, I'll do get the IDs of all entities in the scene. And then the return value is a vector of all entity IDs currently present in the game load. Okay, and we're exporting this so it'll be available inside of the game code as well as the editor. And then inside of scene manager.cpp, we will right above get entities with component, we will define it. Bam, like so. And now inside of here, we simply just need to construct and return a vector of all the entity IDs. And that was through, where's the structure I was looking at before? That'd be through entity indices. I can't simply get them from the entity pool because this contains every single possible entity. We literally just allocate all of the entities that we might ever want to use at the same time. And so this is just a block of memory containing the entire pool. The entity indices is actually the list that associates the entity ID with the index into the entity pool. And then available entity pool indices, that's like the opposite. It is a vector containing all of the available indices into the pool. And it's a little complicated why I do this, but it's mostly for performance reasons, even though it does mean allocating, however many thousand size t's. I find that to be an okay cost for what I needed to do. So let's get all of the entity ID keys out of this. So down in here, we're going to need to do a range-based for loop. We need to get all of the keys out of entity indices. We'll also need a return value, so we'll need to make an stdVector of entity ID called return val, like that. And then inside of here, for every const entity, well, I guess this would be a const auto reference, and then we would use C++ 17's structured bindings for the key and then value. But we're not even going to use the value, so I'm just going to use an underscore because that's my convention for structured bindings that we ignore. I guess it'd be entity, yeah, I'd say EID. That makes sense. So for every entity ID inside of entity indices, we will push back the EID like that. There might be some other C++y way to do this that puts this in a single line, but I don't really care for now. So at this point, we'll just return val. And that's it. We have a way to get the full list of all of the entities in the scene. So let's head back to the hierarchy. And with the scene manager header in place, we should be able to just say stdVector, if I can spell today, vector of entity ID. This would be entities. And we'll assign it to be the return value of EP scene manager get all entities. And from here, we now have a way to actually display every entity in the scene. So we'll start with just displaying the entity IDs, and then we'll work our way to displaying more useful information. So inside of the window, we will need to do a for loop again, and we'll say for every entity ID, const, I should say const entity ID, by reference in entities, which is the vector we got back. Then we will, I need to do entity ID, sorry. We will then display a selectable element with that entity ID in it. So IamGUI selectable, and this is going to be a string label. So what we're going to need to do is we're going to need to do std to string from the EID dot cstring. And then we need to also store whether it's selected. Ooh, that's going to be interesting. So normally the way that this works is that you tell IamGUI. So let me leave the Boolean out for just a moment, and we'll come back to that. So what should be happening with this code is I should be seeing a item inside of the hierarchy for each of the 3 sprites we have in our scene. Let me confirm that all of this compiles and works. And then I'll talk about the problem that I anticipate we're going to deal with.
Let's go, let's move side to side, let's go. Let's go, let's move side to side, let's go. Let's go, let's move side to side, let's go.
Okay, that's not too bad.
Side.
Whenever we change a core system header, I always worry about there being a huge, we got an error about a huge number of compilation units that we have to deal with, but it seems like this is manageable. Scene editor.cpp extern variable has an initializer. Oh, hang on. Yeah, I don't do initialization here. Actually, I don't say extern here either. This is the CVP file, so I just say select identity, and then the header we would say extern. Yeah. All right. Let me recompile that. There we go. And with it running, let's open up a scene. Open up the test scene we've been using so far, where we have these 3 sprites. If we go to the hierarchy, we now have 3 numbers appearing. So these represent the 3 entities inside the scene. These appear to be random numbers, but they're actually just the numbers inside of the scene file. Which this is YAML. There we go. So inside of the scene file, I have listed 1, 2, 3 entities. They have these IDs, and these are the IDs that we are seeing inside of the hierarchy here. They happen to be sorted because the structure I was storing them in was a std map, but they're just these 3, the IDs for these 3 things. Now, what we really want is we want to display the name, the string associated with the entity, and we'll deal with that next. But you'll notice that if I go to click on one of these, it's not selecting, which is different from the code we had copied this from in the IMGUI demo. Let's take a look at that. There we go. So this is what a single selectable section is supposed to look like. What you'll notice is that when I click on one of these, it remains selected. And on this side, I don't see that. And the reason why is because I didn't specify a Boolean for each and every one of the scenes, or sorry, the entities. So let's take a look at the hierarchy again. The first parameter is the text to display. The second is a Boolean pointer. So you pass in the address of a pointer that will be updated to tell your code whether that item is selected. And that's where it kind of gets awkward, because it looks like I'm going to have a Boolean for every entity in the scene in my editor layer. And that's not necessarily a deal breaker, but it's annoying. Like, because am I going to have to am I going to have to allocate every time I go over my limit, or am I going to have to do a pool the size of a pool of booleans the size of the pool of entities? I'm thinking I'm going to have to do the latter. I'm going to need to do a contiguous block of memory just containing booleans. I really wish that I could do something like a bit field here, where I could, instead of having IMGUI overwrite a boolean, have it instead insert a bit into a bit field. However, that actually gives me an idea. Here's something I might be able to do. I could do a stack allocated Boolean, and this would be is selected, like that. I could pass in is selected, or the address of is selected, to the IMGUI call, and then for every selectable that occurs, is selected will be true or false depending on whether it's selected. So what I could do is I could actually do a bit field and then use the return value is selected to flip a bit corresponding with an entity ID. I like that idea a lot better, actually. So how should I go about that? I don't think I've done a lot of bit manipulation, bitwise math on this stream so far, so this might be new territory for some of you. Get all entities. There's a constant. Would it make sense to have an editor selectable component? Do you mean a component attached to an entity that makes it visible in the editor? Is that what you mean? There's a constant value I'm looking for. Here it is, max entities. I can use this value. EP C manager, actually the EP constants, max entities. Okay. I have a way to identify how many. Never mind, it was a dumb idea. It's alright. There's no dumb questions. Only dumb answers. Actually, there might be dumb questions, but you have to work at it. You have to work hard for it. But yeah, the idea is that I want every single entity in the scene to show up here. And if you're using play in editor, and play in editor adds additional spawned entities, I want them to show up in the hierarchy as well. That's just for the sake of transparency. So here's what I'm going to do. Instead of storing a Boolean for every single one of these, I'm simply going to reserve a bit for every single one of these. I know in advance, at least for the moment I do, this is another instance of me punting a more complex problem down the road, but for the moment, the maximum number of entities you can add to a game, or to a scene at the same time, I should say, is this constant value, max entities. While I've been working, I've set it to 3,000 just because I picked a number out of a hat. But that's something that I eventually will expect to be configured per game. You may want to have more or less max entities depending on your game. Like if your game is really small, you don't need to allocate a pool for far too many entities. You could use the infamous vector pool. Yeah, vector pool. Yeah, I don't want to do that though. I think that's bad. You can, and it would work, and it would be simple. But I don't find it very helpful to store an entire byte for every single entity. Because in this small example, for example, even though I've only got a cap of 3,000 max entities, you'd be talking about storing up to, if you don't pre-allocate, and you should, you'd be talking about storing 3,000 bytes. You're talking about a kilobyte for this, or over a kilobyte for just trivial information. If we were to instead reduce this down to 3,000 bits, then we can do the same thing in a couple of bytes. You're talking about 3,000 divided. Oh, that's 300. 3,000 divided by 8. That's 375 bytes, or 375 bytes. That's so much smaller than 3,000 bytes, right? And I think that's probably the way that I'm going to actually store this information, and then I'll deal with handling it after the fact. No, stdVector bool is a specialization of bool, is actually optimized for size using bits. Is that true? Is there a optimization? That's not part of the C++ standard though, right? If it was, like, if it actually like internally implemented bit fields, then that would be great. But this is the first time I've heard of it. Where's my containers? Containers, vector. Oh, that's interesting. Okay, I'm taking a look at that now. Is a possibly space-efficient specialization of stdVector for type bool. The manner in which stdVector bool is made space-efficient is implementation defined. One potential optimization involves coalescing vector elements such as that element occupies a single bit. Okay, that's cool. However, it's also implementation specific, right? Is there any guarantee? It just says one potential optimization. This is good info. I had no idea that they even thought of this. I thought they just kind of glossed over it. I'm gonna Google it. Thanks for this tip. This is interesting. I want to know how reliable this is. If you happen to know, go ahead and let me know inside of the chat. I guess what I could do, if I'm really worried about it, is I could do a test for the implementation on Mac and Windows and confirm that it's actually doing the optimization. because I do have, I'm not targeting every platform and every compiler. I'm specifically targeting MSVC and Clang for Windows and Mac. In fact, I build in Clang first, and then I confirm that it still builds in MSVC. So I do have a way for me to just quickly, I can check those implementations and make sure that those work. But yeah, knowing that this is possible, I guess I may as well use it. Do you happen to know off the top of your head how commonly it is used? I'm looking for something from the Clang documentation to cover this. Must include Clang. Well, whatever. I'm not seeing it, so here's what I'll do: is I'll just do the work myself. I just say I wouldn't use it knowing it's implementation defined. Yeah. In the case of the so this is where I'm a little bit torn. In the case of a game, when this engine is actually done and people are using it, I don't know necessarily which implementation they'll have. I'm presuming that they'll build with Clang or MSVC. So I'm making sure that the code base is good for both compilers. But it is certainly possible that they might use something else to compile their code. But for the case of the editor, I'm not expecting developers using the engine to be compiling the editor. So I could base the editor on the presumption that I'm building on Clang for Mac and Clang for Windows, because that's literally what I'll be doing. But yeah, it's not too much work for me to just do the implementation myself, so I'm just going to do that instead. But yeah, that's an interesting. I had no idea that that was even a thing. If it is, then I might do some experiments and determine whether or not that's useful for me. But I'll look that up later. Anyway, back to where we were. We're gonna implement a bit field. So this is going to be a static. We're gonna allocate this during init for the hierarchy. So yeah, let's make this a. Actually, you know what? We don't even need to do that. We can just do a static array. Let me do that, because the constant value is itself actually a constant expression value, I believe. So I should be able to just do a array. So we'll do a static uint 64t array that's called eid selected bf for bit field, and we'll make this array the size of ep constants max entities, and this will be divided by that would be 64 bits, so divide by 64. And this is an integer division, so this will give us one under the maximum number we would need. For example, if we only had 32 max entities divided by 64, the integer division would be 0. So we need to take and add 1 to this thing, I believe. Right? This seems trivial that I have to double check myself, but I do. Yeah. So this will give us 1 over the integer division of maximum entities divided by 64, which means that we will have enough uint64t's for every entity. So there's a bit for every entity. Good, and because this is a constant expression, we can actually just do this right here. We don't have to do any initialization stuff. We do need this to be initialized to 0 though, so I think I can do this if I'm remembering right. Yeah, and that'll give us a, this will give us 47 8-byte 47 8-byte units for that's pre-initialized to 0. Cool. Now down here inside of bool is selected, once we know whether the entity is selected, we can simply find its index inside of max entities. So EID is the index, and it's selected. No, actually, EID is not the index. EID is the. Oh, sorry. The index is how far we are in this loop. Okay, that's just trying to keep my numbers straight. So we're dealing with the order of entities inside of this list when we were talking about which one is selected. And this order will always be consistent with this list, the list that we get from Scene Manager, get all entities. So we'll need to track the index. Inside of the range-based for loop, we don't actually have an iterator. So I'm gonna, instead of switching to iterators, I'm gonna go ahead and just do this, int I 0. And then at the end, we'll say I++. And then we can use the I to access the bit that we need from EID selected bit field. So we'll say EID selected bit field, and the element that we're going to need to access is going to need to be I divided by 64. So when we get to the 64th bit, or bit index 64, because remember we start at 0, that's going to be the first bit of the second element, that is index 1. So that's how that works. And we would say bitwise or equal, which will flip, it'll flip the bit to a positive if it's true. And we would say is selected, which right now is going to be true or false depending on what IMGUI says about it. And we're going to need to take, and I'm going to use it as a 1. And if I'm being extra, I could cast it to a type. Actually, I probably should cast it to a type. Let me do uint 64t as the type, and then we'll bit shift that value over by I mod 64. I think that's right. Let me do a gut check. So we've got is selected. 64 should probably say ULL on the end. Wait, should it? Actually, that doesn't matter. This should be uint 64t. Okay. So what's happening here is that every time we go through 64 indices, the mod value will loop the counter back around. So this will go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 all the way through 63, and then it'll go back to 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, whatever. This is going to evaluate to a 1 or a 0. If it's a 1, then we are shifting that bit over by however many bits remain after dividing by 64. So this has the effect of finding the correct bit inside of the bit field array, and then sets it. If that makes sense. Cool. So now we have the things selected. We have a bit field representing which of them are selected. I don't even need to use it yet. I basically only needed to pass in a boolean to IamGUI to make it selectable. But now we have the ability to look up what is selected. What has happened? Oh, I still have the program running. I was trying to recompile while it was still running. There we go. So inside of the scene view, if we go to open up a scene, there it is. We have the items here. Oh, and interestingly, I go to click it and the selection goes away almost immediately. Huh. Oh, that's even weirder. Look at what's happening here. They're selecting and deselecting as I must have misunderstood how the IamGUI selectable works. Let's take a look at the header file. A selectable highlights when hovered, and I can display another one selected. This is so I blah blah blah. Yeah, let me go to the header. Okay, if you use the pointer to a bool, it is a read-write. So it actually needs to know the state of the bool that I am storing. So, alright, so we have stored the bool in here. I now need to access it when I go to set up bool is assigned, when I go to allocate it on the stack. So this is going to be equal to eid selected bit field at I divided by 64, same as essentially the same access as we have here, and inside of there we need to check whether using a bitwise and whether the imod 64th bit has been set. I believe that's right. Let me let me look at this again. I don't do bitwise stuff too often, so I have to double check myself. Imod 64 gets me the bit. This gets me the element, and this gets me the bitwise and. So this should be only. Oh, I need a 1 here. And I should. Yeah. I should probably just know off the top of my head the order, or the operator precedent here, but instead of Googling it, I'm just gonna do extra parentheses. So imod 64 gives me the bit of the correct bit field. I am using 1, shifting it over. So this will return a number with the correct bit set. And then I'm using bitwise and against this. And if this is 0, it means that that bit wasn't set. If it's non-zero, it means that it was. And non-zero, when cast to a bool, makes it true. Yeah, okay, I think this is what we need. Alright. Open up a scene and go to the hierarchy, and cool. Now that's kind of cool, except for we are at no point setting it back to false, it looks like. So what happened was I just went to click on the entity in the list, and it just remains selected. Let's take a look again at the IamGUI example. So what they use is they use a character buffer to represent whether it's selected. And the bool that they pass in is selected equals n. Okay, so they are, in this code, choosing which one is selected. Versus... okay, so if selectable returns true, then we mark it as selected. Okay, that makes sense. So heading back to this code, this selectable returns whether the item has been selected. Yeah, so if I want to select one at a time, then I would need a static entity ID. Oops. Or EP entity ID. Right? Do I not have entity IDs? What's happening? Yeah, there it is. A static entity ID that represents the selected one. But actually, it'll be uint. Ooh. How would I deselect a entity if I want to have it selected? Because if I go to click on it, it will mark it as selected. But what marks it as unselected, besides my own code? Clicking outside of the selectable would deselect it. I guess we can go back to plan A, which was only selecting one at a time. So if that's the case, if we're only selecting one at a time, then we don't actually need the bit fields for this. I will eventually need to do selecting multiples, but I don't know yet how I would have imGUI tell my code that I wanted to deselect. That'll probably involve something to do with like checking, like holding down the shift key or something like that. But I'll worry about that later. Instead, what I'll do is I'll do a bool. I'll do vector selected entity IDs. Yeah, well, I mean that's not different structurally speaking to the bit field thing. The difference is that in the bit field we're just, you know, we already know by the index of the bit which IDs are selected in the list. We just find which entity ID aligns with which bit, and we can identify which of the things are selected. And if we run the code that we got, and I'll quickly do that, that technically is happening. The only thing that's not happening is the ability to deselect. So if I go to open scene and open up the 3 sprite scene, they start off as unselected, and if I click one, then it knows that 15948 whatever, that this is selected and the other 2 aren't. So if I click the other one, then it knows that the first and the third are selected. So the problem isn't knowing which are selected. The problem is having imGUI deselect. That's a imGUI side thing. So I could either require that we only select one entity, which is in the end what we were not going to do, or we can do a multiple selection thing. So I guess we're going to dive back into the imGUI code now. I kind of like the way that this works in Unity, and it's also the way that file selection works in like your operating system in Windows. Basically, if you hold down, if you click one, then it deselects all the others. If you hold down Shift while clicking, it selects everything in between. If you hold down Control, then it'll add the selection. So what we could do, this is a selection of, or a bit field indicating which entities are selected. What we could do, we could track the index of the last selected entity, whether it's from single clicking or not, and then use the index of the last selected entity to determine how ranges are selected. Which appears to be how Unity does it. So we store the last selected with no modifiers. So single click sets this value, control click does not. And then if we're holding down shift and we click, then we will select the range from there to there. Okay, so we'll need to get the input here. Let's do, it was imGUI get key down, is key down, imGUI key, and we will use left shift or right shift, I suppose. There we go. If we'll say bool shift selecting equals this, is the left or the right shift key down, and then we'll do something similar for is control selecting. Like that. And so now we know whether we are shift or control selecting. What happens if you do both? Let me try that out real quick. It kind of looks like shift wins when it comes to this. So if we're holding down both shift and control, the convention, I suppose, is that shift selects more things, so we use that. Anyway, so when we use imGUI selectable, it'll return true or false depending on whether it was selected, I guess. The documentation is not really robust, but looking at the code example, if imGUI selectable returns true, then we set selectable to n. My guess is that, oh, you know what? This is using a different version of selectable than I was using. The overload of selectable that I was using accepted a bool pointer as the second parameter. This one just accepts a bool. Hang on. Indicating whether it is selected, and then it returns whether it should be. Okay, I like that a lot better. So heading back to my code, instead of setting is selected like this, I can simply pass in an R value like this. Get rid of that ampersand. And add another parentheses. So what this is doing is that inside of the second parameter, I am constructing the R value that represents 0 or non-zero for whether the index is selected. If it is selected, then imGUI will highlight it as if it's selected. If it's not selected and I click it, it will mark it as selected. Okay, so I need to store this. into a variable. Okay, I think I'm getting somewhere. So this Boolean now will tell us whether the element is still selected. And then from there we can do the shift clicking or control clicking logic. So we'll need to store, and I'll do this as a static inside this function. Static unit 64T. Actually, this can just be a static int. Last single selected index equals 0. So the last single selected index will represent, actually I'll do -1 for this to make it an invalid index. The last single selected index is going to be the last index we single clicked without holding down shift or control. And then we will determine which entities are selected based off of it. So if is selected returns true, that means that we have clicked on the selectable, I believe. We can then determine based off of is shift clicking or control selecting whether to set this index. So let's do that now. If shift clicking and control clicking both evaluate to false, then we can change the last single selected index, man, that's a mouthful, to be equal to I. Yeah, that makes sense. Cool. And then from there, we could say else. So if one of them is true, we'll say else if shift selecting. From here, what we would do is we would take and select every index between last single selected index unless last single selected index is less than 0 or greater than 0, greater than or equal to 0. As long as this is valid, we would then do a shift selection between last single selected index and the new one. So last single selected index and I. Though now that I'm looking at the code, I realize this should be a nested if. If last single selected index is greater than or equal to 0, and then else. Because in the else block we need to set, we need to do last single selected index. Well, if we're shift selecting and we haven't yet selected an entity, so we don't have anything selected and I hold shift and I click, it'll just do it like a single selection. So yeah, we'll set, in the else block, we'll set last single selected index to I. And inside of the upper block, we will say, we will need to actually do the range selection. So for int I equals std min, I guess, of last single selected index, and I is less than std max. This is gonna get a little bit wordy, but I think it's important code. std max last single selected index and I minus the min. I plus plus. Oh, but I'm already using I. I'm using I as the iterator through this block. So I'll make this J. And I'll worry about coming up with better names before I go to commit. Okay, and let's review this real quick. So J is equal to the smaller of last single selected index, and I being the index into the list that we are that we have in the hierarchy panel. We continue until J is less than the difference between the larger and the lesser. And we hit J++ after that. What is this complaining about? No std, no instance of overloaded function. Okay, because I'm trying to use a int and a uint64t. So yeah, I guess what I'll do for J then is I'll make it a uint64t as well. Not a whole lot of reasons not to. Come on. Oh, last single selected index is the one that we care about. Yeah, so we'll make this uint64t as well. Because why not? Okay, good. So what this is doing is it's just doing an iteration through every index between the last selected and the currently selected. Which, now that I'm thinking about it, might be excluding the element after. Because let me think this through. So this is index outside of this scene listing up top. This is index 0. This is index 3. If I have index 3 as the last single selected, and I hold down Shift and select, we need to go, we have the difference between 0, 1, and 2. 2 minus 0, that gives me only 2 elements. I need to add 1 to this range. I think. We'll see how this works. Well, I'll start without the +1 and can just double check that it does underselect, and then we'll move on from there. Cool. And so now we need to do this bitwise logic down here for every single J. So that'll be J divided by 64, J mod 64. Cool. And yeah. And then let's go ahead and do control clicking. Because if we have, if neither of them are true, we do this. If shift selecting isn't true, then control selecting must be true. So we just use an else block here. And then while control selecting, we actually do set it to be the last single selected index. Because when I hold down Shift and click again, the last... Oh, that's not true, isn't it? That's interesting. I'm trying to establish the behavior that I'm seeing. Unity actually might not be super consistent about this. So I first select this entity, I control click this entity, I hold down shift and I select the entity above, and it'll do it from the last time I single clicked without holding down control. If I do it the other direction though, and I hold down shift, yeah, that's not consistent. So I'm holding down control on both of these. So if I go up, then it will shift select for the last control selected item. If I'm going down, oh, okay, whatever. I'll play around with what I prefer later. But I'll say last single selected index equals I for control selecting. And let's go ahead and move this code into the ifs up here. And I think we've got something. Let's build. Oh, the program's still running. I keep doing that. I keep leaving the application running and building it. All right. Cool. So we got a scene view, open up a scene, got the hierarchy. Okay. So we're still not deselecting anything. Oh, because I have to do that myself. I forgot to do that. So if we are not shift or control selecting, then we will be deselecting everything else. So what we would do is we would first set every single other bit to 0. And this is another reason why bit fields are better than an array of bools. Is we can just go through, iterate through the bit fields a little ways. Just a handful, basically, comparatively speaking. There's 47 of these objects, but not 3,000 of them. We would say for every uint 64T reference in EID selected bit fields, we would set bf equals 0. And that's how we clear it. Cool. Let's try this again. All right. Open scene, got a 2D scene, got the hierarchy. Yeah, memset may be better. You're right about that. However, more importantly to this discussion, it looks like what I just did doesn't work either. When I go to select something, it doesn't actually save the selection. Why not? So when I go to single click something without holding shift or control, we first clear all of the selected bits. Yeah, and now that you mention that, it's going to annoy me that, that's not what I'm doing. So let me go ahead and use memset on that. We'll use EID selected. And then value is going to be 0, and then the size is going to be size of EID selected bit field, which I believe gives us the array count. 376. No, it gives us the bytes. Right? Okay, because this has got 47 elements times 8 is 376. Yeah. So that is a little bit cleaner looking. So we're clearing out the buffer. We then set the last single selected index to I. And then we set the bit for that item. I'm going to set a breakpoint here to see what I can find. Not sure what I'm overlooking. Okay, so I've got the scene open. I just switched to the hierarchy. We've got shift selecting and control selecting triggering already. I wasn't expecting that. That's interesting. It's triggering constantly. Oh, hang on. I think I know what's going on here. I'm not using a selected for this. I need to be. So I need to say, okay, that's a rookie mistake. So if is selected, then we do all this logic instead of just doing it for every item I reframe. All right, let's try that out. Whoopsie. All right, F5. File, open scene, yada yada yada. There's the hierarchy. Okay, so single selecting is working now. That's, you know, an important baseline. Is shift clicking working? Shift clicking is not working. How about control clicking? Nope, not working either. But we got single clicking working, so that's an important baseline. All right. So if is selected. So if is selected, we do this logic if we are neither shift selecting or control selecting. We're supposed to be triggering this logic if we are shift selecting, and this logic for control selecting. Let's set breakpoints within those two blocks and see if the code actually executes. Here we go. Open scene file, this guy, go to the hierarchy, and now I'm going to try control clicking. Okay, so control clicking is not even triggering its code block, and neither is shift clicking, so there's something going wrong there. So let's do something to confirm that this is working as I expected. If is key down on left shift or right shift, we should have shift selecting. If is key down, left control or right control, then you get the idea. Let's do a breakpoint. We'll do a conditional breakpoint here. I'll turn off these other breakpoints. And then on this guy, the condition, if we go to edit breakpoint, the condition is going to be shift selecting equals true, or control selecting equals true. So if either of these are true, then we'll hit the breakpoint. Okay, let's open up the scene. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, here we are. If I hold down shift, it triggers the breakpoint. If I continue and then hold down control, it triggers the breakpoint. So the booleans are working as I thought they would be. I couldn't think of a reason why they wouldn't be, but you got to check your assumptions. All right, and so we've got is selected, returns presumably when we have clicked on an item, or if it is still selected after the frame finishes. So if shift selecting and control selecting are false. Oh, you know what? This should be an or. If we are neither shift selecting or control selecting, then we do this logic. Right? Would that have made a difference? If we, so this is saying if both shift and control selecting are not being done, then we will do else if shift selecting. Yeah, so let's fix that. Let's see if that fixes it. All right, opening up a scene file. This guy, the hierarchy. Okay, shift selecting did something. So I hold down shift. Okay, so it is doing a range selection, but that thing that I had suspected about the range selection logic is correct. So let me implement that fix. That was down here. We do need to actually extend the range by 1 because I'm using index to index rather than a size range. So we need to actually do less than +1, or you know what, to make this a little bit more clear, let's do less than or equal to the second index. That'll be a little bit more transparent. Cool. And now if we open up the scene file, yada yada yada, hold down shift click, it selects the entire range. If I single click, it selects just one. Good. And is control click working off the bat? Control click is working. Okay. Well, control click is kind of working. If I control click on the same item twice, it doesn't deselect the selected item. So let's change that logic a little bit. So down here, when we're control selecting, we set it to be the last single selected index. That's fine. However, actually that's not fine. How does Unity do it? So if I control click a number of items, then I deselect the last item, and then I hold down shift and click the next item, it seems to remember the second to last control clicked item. Is it maintaining a stack of selected items? I think it might be. That's interesting. Because it seems to know, okay, let me do a little bit of experiment. I'm control clicking every other element in this list. And then I'm going to control click on the last several. And then I'm going to hold down the shift key and then click. Yeah, it selects the range from player boy down. Okay. So, how does Windows do it? Let's find a Windows Explorer location and test this out. So, software, enterprise. Okay, so this is the root enterprise directory. If I hold down control click on several items and then deselect a couple, and then hold down shift and click on the next one. Okay, so Unity does this a little differently than Windows does. So what Windows did is what I kind of expected to happen, which is that when I deselect a couple of elements, it will still range select from the last clicked on element, like this. So deselect, now hold down shift and I click. It selects between the last item I deselected. You can argue that that doesn't make sense, and it probably doesn't. But in order for Unity to do the selection that it does, it actually must be maintaining a list of all of the single selected items in order. So that way you can remove elements from that list, and the most recently selected single selected item will be the base for the range select that you do next. I kind of like that, actually. So let's implement that instead. So instead of just doing last single selected index as a single value, like this, let's do a list of them. Not necessarily sure that I like that it's a uint64t. It doesn't have to be. The only reason why I'm doing that is because now I'm using it in std min and max with a uint64t type. But whatever, I'll rethink this stuff after it's working. So instead of just doing a uint64t, I'm going to do an std list. of this. Oops, I need to zoom in again. There we go. And then this no longer makes sense. This is going to be a linked list instead of an array because I need to be able to randomly remove elements. And also, this is not likely to be a very sizable list, so I'm actually okay with dynamically allocating an element each time I go to do a single selection inside of the editor. I'm not going to be allocating memory for this like every frame or something like that. I think this will be reasonably performant. So what we'll do is we will, wherever we were assigning last single selected index, we will now instead insert it. So I forget if it's like pushback or insert. The insert requires an iterator, right? So let's push back on I. And this is if we are just single selecting an item. Actually, if we're just single selecting an item, then we can just erase the whole list and then insert I at the back. So we'll say last single selected index dot clear, and then call pushback. And while I'm thinking about it, I should rename this to be indices. There we go. Like that. If we are shift selecting, then we are, by definition, only adding elements to the list. So we'll say if last single selected indices is greater than or equal to 0, this is referring to the bounds check that we had before to ensure that this is actually a selected value. So instead of checking the value, what we do is we just say dot size. Or do we have like a has elements? I guess not. So what we'll do is we'll say dot size. If it's 0, then we won't do this logic. Cool. And now we got the std min and max. So we're comparing the topmost element of this list. So we're going to say dot back for these comparisons. My voice is already getting a little bit raspy. How long have I been doing this? 2 hours? All right. I may need to take a break here in a minute. Yeah, and then while we're shift selecting, it's not possible for us to be deselecting something. So this logic should hold, except for this. We need to, if we are single selecting, if we're holding down shift while we haven't had anything selected, then we do need to do a pushback. I keep hitting Control 0 and that keeps making my code smaller. All right, there we go. And now control selecting is the whole reason why we changed this to a list. And that's because we can deselect items this way. First we need to check whether it's already selected. Let's do a quick stack allocated bool just to make this a little bit easier to read. So we'll say bool was already selected equals EID selected for I divided by 64, and we'll use and equals, or and, sorry, not and equals, and is selected and 1 bit shifted over. Is that right? 1 bit shifted over by the mod value. Yeah. So we got a bool was already selected, and if it was already selected, we will do deselecting. Otherwise, we will do selecting. And selecting code will look very similar to what we already had. Like that. Except for last single selected indices will be dot pushback on I, like that. EID selected BF. Yeah, and we'll set the bit for selected as well. Cool. And now if we say if it was already selected, then we need to do two things. We need to unset the bit for it being selected. So we can just modify this code real quick to do that. So what we need to do is we need to do an inversion of this. So what the tilde operator does on bitwise stuff is it takes and flips all of the bits in the value. So where before I was getting a 1 set on the bit in question, I now have every other bit set to be 1 and a 0 set on the one in question. So if we logically OR this together, or sorry, bitwise OR this together with the bit field in question, it will have the effect of turning off that bit only. But yeah, now that I'm thinking about this, was already selected, is selected. We already are in a block that is only occurring when is selected as true. I didn't think about this before, but I can actually get rid of all of this now. I can just replace that with a 1. Probably should do a ULL though. Is selected, because if we're in this block, is selected is true. That's how this code executes in the first place. So let's just replace every example of this with a 1 ULL 1 ULL. The exception being here, where if it was selected, we're going to deselect. So instead of being a 1, we'll do a 0. And here, where if it wasn't already selected, then we do select. So this will be a 1 ULL. All right. So in the case that we're deselecting, we the one thing we have to do is we have to mark it as deselected inside of the bit field. And now we also have to do a removal of the element from last single selected indices. Which I think I can just do erase, and it'll search for the element. I'm not quite clear on that. I don't use this all the time. Const std list const iterator. Okay, it looks like erase requires an iterator. So what we'll do is we'll do dot erase, and then we'll pass in the iterator to the element, and we'll do that using stdFind. Which I believe you can just pass in the beginning element, last single selected indices dot begin, and then last single selected indices dot end, and then the value that we actually care about, which in this case is the index at I, or the index I, right? Cool. It's a little wordy and hacky, whatever, but basically this block here, stdFind, it iterates through the entire selected indices. It searches for I within it, and then when it finds it, it passes that to the erase so that we can remove it. Cool. I think that's pretty good. Let's try it out. All right, F5. And open up the scene, and we got the scene here. Let's take a look at the hierarchy. Hierarchy's got the stuff in it. Control clicking is not exactly working correctly. So what I did is I selected the top one, and then I hit Control and I selected the last one, and they are both selected. So control clicking additively seems to work. But if I control click subtractively by control clicking on the last element, it winds up selecting all of them. So what did I mess up? Let's start by setting a breakpoint on was already selected. So this is the location where we should be deselecting things. And then let's try deselecting a thing. All right. So first thing is that was already selected is correctly set to true. We are now iterating through last single selected indices. Let's take a look at what is inside of last single selected indices. So I'll add it to the watch window. That's interesting. Do I have to provide the namespace? Editor, use, marquee. Undefined? That's weird. Why would you think that? For some reason, the watch window seems to think that the symbol's undefined. Oh, but there's the symbol there. What's... Why didn't it... Okay, whatever. So it's inside the variable, it's not inside the watch window for some reason. I guess I must have mistyped something. But yeah, currently it's got two values in it, 0 and 2, which makes sense because the we have three elements. The ones that are already selected are elements 0 and 2. We're skipping the middle one. And then if I was to step over, what does this look like? Okay, actually, interestingly, the last selected single indices does reduce down to just 0. So it does. This code seems to work. It is removing the elements correctly. So it must be something in my bitwise logic. So right now we're selecting the correct bit field to do math on. Oh, this is actually nonsense. Hang on a second. This is nonsense. Yeah. So what I was doing is I was taking a value of 0, and I was telling it to bit shift the whole thing over by I bits, or I mod 64 bits. And that doesn't make any sense because that's just going to be 0 no matter how many times you bit shift. So actually what I was mixing my logic up. I need to do the 1 bit shifted over to the correct location for the bit that we want to unset, and then we flip the whole thing using the tilde, and then we OR that together. Okay. That's probably all the problem was. Let's rebuild that. F5 it. And open the scene. There it is. We've got the scene loaded up. Here's the hierarchy. Moment of truth time. Let's click the first one, control click the second one, control click the second one again, and it's still doing weird selecting things. So I wonder what happened there. On the bright side, shift clicking seems to be working, but and single clicking appears to be working, but it's this deselecting of... Yeah, what did I mess up? Let me set the breakpoint again. Okay, clicking on one, control clicking on the second, control clicking on the second again. We step over that call, and last single selected indices is back to exactly what we had expected, which is that the last single selected indices dot back is element 0 because it was the first one I control clicked. And then EID selected bit field. We have I, which is equal to 3, it should be, or sorry, 2, because it's the third element. So we take 1, we bit shift it over by 2 to get the correct bit, and then we flip the whole thing over. Oh, I need to be using an AND. These are elementary things that my brain is just not connecting the dots for some reason today. This needs to be an AND, not an OR. Okay. Bitwise AND makes it so that only if both bits are set on both comparing numbers does it set the bit, and I need it to be turning off unconditionally. Alright, opening up the scene file again. Got the scene, the hierarchy's got the things and stuff in it. Control clicking and control clicking. Oh, I still have my breakpoint set. Continue. Okay. So control clicking seems to be working better now. I'm going to need to add several more elements to this list to really test it out. So let's do that real quick. Let's go to the scene file. This guy. And we'll just quickly add a number of additional entities. Control C, B. And now I do need these all to have unique identifiers that are greater than a constant value that I can't quite remember what it is. So what I'll do is I'll just start incrementing each of these. And it's going to be a little tedious, but soon enough we'll be at the point where I don't have to do manual modification of scene files. All right, now that those are all unique, I suppose I'm going to need to have sprites assigned to each of them, just so that they're visible. So let me redo this. And then I'm just giving these all slightly different sprites. Almost done. This is the tedious part. Okay. And just make sure everything is at the right level, because this is YAML and you have to make sure that everything is indented to the correct level. All of these need to come in one level. Good. So the component section, we get the sprite component section, and we have every ID from up above is associated with a sprite. Okay. And then let's just offset these a little bit so that they're not all on the same plane. So we'll do 0 on these guys. We'll do 5 on these guys. We'll do -5 on these guys. And these guys I'll do 10. Just to have them all in separate locations. Okay, saving. Let's run the editor. We'll open up the scene file again. If we go to the scene mode. Okay, so something didn't work. I must have mistyped something. Failure loading entities from 2dscene.epscene. YAML exception thrown, message end of map not found. What did I screw up? It's actually not immediately obvious to me what I screwed up. It's just YAML. Do I use quotes in here anywhere? That's a good idea, what's up? Let me search for one of those. There we go. That was a very smart idea. I just didn't think to do it. It says valid YAML. If it's valid YAML, then that should be the end of the story. I'm not using my own YAML parser here. Oh, hang on. What's happening down here in the... It looks like there's a ternary operator happening here in the position and scale values of these sprites. What? What is that? Is ternary a thing in YAML? That's a little bit weird. The linter inserted this. Let me take a look at those values. Oh, hang on. I see the problem. Yeah, so what's happened here is that these levels, because I was pasting the contents of these sprites underneath these IDs, these are indented too far. Ugh. So I have to... unindent them. Outdent them, I think is what the term is. There we go, selected, Shift Tab. Yeah, I don't know why. So I guess it technically is valid YAML. It's just that I was expecting these keys to be one level in instead of two. Okay, save, and then close scene, open scene, and reopen it. There we go. Okay, so now we've got a scene which has many more sprites in it. I'm actually a little bit surprised how many Madeleines there are in here. Is that on me, or is that on the... Huh, okay, this reveals maybe an issue with my sprite renderer. Which, again, the sprite renderer is like just a stand-in for other systems. But apparently there's an issue where some of my sprites are being rendered as Madeleine when they should be the other sprites. We'll come back to that. That's unrelated to the thing we're dealing with right now. Point is, though, that now we've got unique IDs for a whole bunch of things in the hierarchy list. So let's do some selection comparison. It looks like single selection is working quite fine. If I shift-click, that didn't work. Hang on. So I've got the first one selected. I shift-click to number 60. I then do shift clicking from number 60 onward, and there's a offset problem, it looks like. So if I hold down shift from this element, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so the index number 4, it only shift selects 1, 2, 3. Yeah, that's weird. Let's take a look at that. Here. All right. So when we're shift selecting, I must be screwing up this business with the last selected indices.back. That's my first presumption. So last selected single indices.size confirms that we are operating on a single selected index. Because if we don't have anything selected, then all we do is we push back the element. It's basically making it equivalent to single selecting. So if I have nothing selected, oh, I don't have a way to deselect everything. I can control click and deselect, but I can't just click out of the list. I'll add that later. But like if I have nothing selected and I hold down shift, it's the equivalent of single selection. So let's take a look at this loop. This seems to be where the issue stems from. So what I've got is an iterator, j, or an iteration variable, j, starting at the lesser of the back index or I, and I is the index into the list of entities we've got so far. And the reason why I'm using min and max here is that I wanted to iterate one direction, and I don't know which one is on the low end or the high end. As long as j is less than or equal to the maximum of these two values minus the minimum. So this should iterate through every index between the last selected index and the current index, the one that we're selecting. So for every one of those, we are going into the bit field. Oh, this is the issue. J. Oh wait, never mind. I was thinking that J was that J was incorrect because J wasn't the starting at the minimum, but it is. Let's make this a little easier to read. We'll do int j equals 0. J is less than or equal to less than or equal to the absolute. I'll do absolute value of indices back minus I. J++. That makes sense. More than one instance of ABS matches, because I is a uint64t and last selected indices is oh, good catch. Yeah, that. You're a pretty sharp one, what's up? Or either that or I'm a slow one. Or both. Yeah, so absolute value doesn't actually apply here. But if I go back to the way that the code was before, I don't think that applies. So j equals 0. Yeah, I'll have to keep undoing to get back to the way that the code was. Here. So this is the way that it used to be. J is starting at stdmin, starting at the last single selected index, or the one that we're selecting now. It's increasing, and we continue until we reach the larger of... This seems really straightforward to me. Let me set a breakpoint here and try this out. Try stepping through it and see what that does. Okay, we have the scene. In the hierarchy, I'll select this one, and I'll hold Shift and click this one. Okay, so for starters, last selected indices dot back gives us the index 4, which 0, 1, 2, which is correct. The last selected index was the 5th element, so index 4. And then I is equal to 9, which also sounds right. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah. So these are as expected. We are setting the bit for J, which J right now is set to 4. So we have 1 bit shifted over to J mod 64, accessing bit field element J divided by 64. That all makes sense to me. Stepping. J is 5 now. Yeah, that's still... Oh, that's interesting. We stopped after 5. Wonder why that happened. So that condition is incorrect somehow. Oh. Yeah, this is the problem. So what I was doing was I was starting at the index, and I was ending at the... I was treating this like I was starting at 0 in my condition. I was continuing until the difference between the min and the max, not just the max. Okay. Let's go, let's move side to side, let's go. Let's go, let's move side to side, let's go. Let's go, let's move side to side, let's go. Everybody bring it in. Okay, so J equals the min, J is less than or equal to the max, J++. I feel like if I was working offline, I probably wouldn't have made this mistake in the first place. I just wasn't thinking it through while I was trying to talk and code. Kind of a rookie mistake. All right. Let's turn off that breakpoint. Open the scene. Cool, we got a scene. Got a hierarchy. And now shift clicking is working as corrected, as we expected. Even with the behavior that we are copying from Unity. So I selected 3 by control clicking, I hold down shift and then click the last one. It extends from the last element. If I do this again, but deselect the last element and hold down shift and click, it does it from the second to last element. And if I do, if I remove the middle element and hold down shift, it'll do still from the last element. And if I remove the middle element, then the top element, and then hold down shift, it'll go for the first element. Cool. That seems to be working quite well. I think it's pretty much working perfectly, actually. The only thing left would be to allow deselecting by clicking outside of the range of IDs. That'd be the next thing. I'm going to take a quick break. I've been going at this for 2.5 hours. Already made some decent progress. When I come back, we'll take a look at getting the deselection to work in the hierarchy without having to control click on the item. I just want to be able to click down here and then deselect. And then following that, looking at getting some more useful information about the entities displayed in the hierarchy and maybe even in the inspector. Cool. I'll be back in, I don't know, like, let's say 10 or 15 minutes. I'll give my voice a rest. Enjoy some music while I am out. Alrighty. Alright, I'm back. Had a little snack, refilled my water. Back to getting to work on this thing. So we've got pretty decent multi-select behavior inside of the hierarchy. Basically stuff that we kind of had to hack our way through because I have never used IamGUI before this project. Or Dear IamGUI, I should say. But yeah, we can shift click and control click and all the other clicks, and it seems to be working just fine. There's just this one little nagging thing that I want to take care of, and that's clicking outside of the list does not deselect everything that's in the list. So to do that, first I'm going to just take a look at the Dear IamGUI demo. This is the go-to resource for seeing the way that you can do things. I think this is a really nice approach. So let's take a look at these selectables. So we have the multi-select. So their multi-select doesn't use the shift key. It just uses the control key. But how do I deselect? Can I? It doesn't look like I can select outside of the list and have it deselect. I don't think they've got an example of this. Okay, let's presume that they don't have a working example for what I want to do. Let's go to. There's actually a tool in here that might be useful. There's the IamGUI stack tool, which tells you what you're hovering over. Hovered ID is 0. Active ID is 0. When I go to click, I do get an active ID of this 686C9 business. Hover an item with the mouse to display elements of the ID stack, indicating the item's final ID. Each level of the stack corresponds to a push ID call. All levels of the stack are hashed together to make the final ID of the widget. ID displayed at the bottom of the stack, read FAQ entry. So unlike the elements inside of this list, I don't actually see the stack, I just see the active ID change. So I'm presuming that active ID has to do with which window I'm clicking in, because it's different for the inspector versus the hierarchy versus the content view. However, I'm not sure how I would get that ID if I don't actually see the stack. Like if I mouse over these and I take a look at the seed, the hierarchy window has a hash of 788BA, and that's different from the hash that I get from clicking into the blank area of that same window. So I'm not really clear. There must be a there must be a hash that's derived from the title somehow, or derived from the key, but I'm not seeing it inside of the stack. However, what is clear though is that the hovered ID does not change. So perhaps I could check if I'm clicking the mouse inside of the view, I might be able to check the hovered ID, and if the hovered ID is 0, then I can just deselect everything. That might be one way to do it. I'm going to quickly Google this to see if somebody else has had a more elegant solution to this problem. A little surprised that this is not a top question, because this is probably a very common thing people do. Wow, that's interesting. 0 results for deselect in IMGUI on Stack Overflow. All right. So we'll just stick with the first idea, which is that we will, when we go to click inside of the window, we will detect whether we are clicking with a hovered ID at 0. Excuse me. All right. So on this one, we're iterating through all of the entities. Let's before we go through the iteration, I'm going to say IMGUI clicked. We'll say is mouse clicked, specifying the left mouse button. Oops, I did it again. There we go, left. So if the mouse is clicked and IMGUI hovered, let's start with is any item hovered? I'm curious to see how that works. Then we'll say that we'll deselect everything, and that will be that'll be done by using the section of code we wrote for single selection, where we mem set back to 0, and then we clear the last single selected indices list. Like that. I have a suspicion that this will deselect whenever we click anywhere that's not an item, not just within the view, but I'm not 100% clear on how IMGUI handles this stuff, so I'm just going to try it the naive way and then work my way back if there's a problem. Cool. So we've got the scene loaded with all the different sprites in it, and if I go to select and click outside, it does deselect, so that's cool. However, if I select and I click into another window, it also deselects, and that's not what I want. But at least this is a approach. Because if I click on something that's interactable, it doesn't deselect, and so on. Okay, let's see if there's an additional comparison I can check. We'll go into the IMGUI namespace again. We have is window hovered and is item hovered and is mouse hovering rect. Let's say is window hovered as well. And we are already inside the window that we are checking, so it should be enough just to say is window hovered. So to recap, we're checking whether you just click the mouse, whether we are over an item, and whether we are hovering over the window. Hopefully that's enough. Man. Alright, open scene. Okay, we got the scene. See all the sprites, and we get the hierarchy. Now if I have a bunch of stuff selected and I click outside, it will deselect, but it won't if I change into another window. It'll only deselect if I click somewhere else within the same window. Which actually makes sense. I think this might be done. I think that might be the solution. Yeah, okay, I kind of like that. You might argue that if I go to click in the empty space when I change to the hierarchy view, that I might want to maintain the selection for the first click, but that's a nice to have, not a must have. It doesn't belong in the MVP. Okay, cool. So I think that is the end of the selection code, which is great. Now that we've got that going, let's see if we can't display something a little bit more interesting inside of the editor. Man. So, for starters, what we can do is we can list the name of the entity inside of the hierarchy. That just instantly would make it far more useful. However, we also need a mechanism by which we can get the other data to display in the inspector. So how might we do that? I guess we could add an API to the engine layer that just gets us the contents of the entity struct, or just passes us the entity struct for whichever ID we ask. I think that would make sense. And then from there, because if I'm remembering correctly, if we go to the scene manager, which is where we have all this stuff, we have a struct entity here that actually contains the information about the struct. If I was to pass this out as part of an API call, something that would need to change is that I would need to make this a publicly visible struct. I don't think that it is at this point. If we go to the header for this, yeah, the entity is just like an internal structure used inside of scenemanager.cpp. If we take a look at the getter functions, we have get position, get rotation, get scale. Position, rotation, scale. And that's it. We also have the get entities with component and get all entities getters. I think for now I'm going to just continue with this scheme where I get the position of an entity or rotation as I need it instead of passing the entire structure out. I may change my mind about that later, but for now I'm just going to keep with it. So I'm going to add another API call. In this case it'll be an std string we get out. Actually, we could do a const std string reference, so that way we're not copying it. It'll be get entity name. Entity ID is the parameter. However, I will do it as just a regular reference. So in the event that you want to modify the name, you can. That's going to be what I do. All right. Excuse me. So let's quickly do the documentation for it before I forget. We'll say get the string name of an entity, the ID of the entity to query, and the return value is a reference to the string name of the entity. Cool. Simple enough. Let's head back to the CPP file and let's implement it. Get entity. So right above get entity position, we'll do std string by reference, scene manager, get entity name, or accept the entity ID as the parameter. Cool. And this is pretty straightforward. We just do a check to make sure that we have the entity inside, and if the entity is available, then we will return the value. So I can actually just copy this code like that, and then instead of doing .position, we'll do .name, and it'll pass it out my reference. Hopefully, hang on a second. Reference type of cannot be initialized with the value of type hash name. Oh, I'm not storing the string name. That's right. I forgot about that. So in the on the internal side, I had just been storing the hash of the name instead of the actual name. My idea was that I was thinking that I wouldn't actually ever need to store the string name of any given entity, because if you're just working directly in code without an editor, at what point in the shipping game do you need the string name of every entity? Do I actually use it anymore? Let me quickly search for it. I do when we're saving to YAML. So if we save a scene file to a YAML format, which admittedly you probably won't do in a shipping game, I take and unhash the string name. I call hash name to string, which gets the interned string name. But other than that, I don't really use it. So I'll go ahead and just change the name value associated with each entity. I'll change that to an std string. Like that. And that surely will have broken code in a number of places, so let me just quickly fix it wherever I see it. So I don't need the two-string code in any of these places. Okay, and when we go to create the entity, we can pass in an std string for it. I don't really care too hard about that. I may want to make it optional though. To not require you to pass in a name for the entity that you create. I think this is what I'll do. I'm going to move the string name parameter to be the last parameter in my create function. And I'm going to make it an std optional. Like that. That by default will be std null opt. Is that right? Null opt. Am I in the header or am I in the CPP file? I'm in the header. Okay, so I do need to add std optional here. There we go. Cool. So the difference is that when you go to spawn an entity from game code, you can specify a string name, or you don't have to. Cool. So let's head back to the create entity call. This is now the last. Oops. This will be an std optional std string name, like that. And then inside of here, when we go to add the element to the entity pool actually, I could make the string name optional as well. Yeah, let's do that. Like that. And then by default, it'll be std null opt, like that. Okay. So now when we go to return the entity name, we can either pass out its string name if it was provided one, or pass out its ID as a string. And the ID is guaranteed to be unique. So what we'll do is we'll say if entity indices.count entity, so if we have this anywhere, then we can return either the string name or the ID. So we'll say if entity pool, I'll just copy the code from here, like that. So if the name exists, then we will return it. Else we will return dot ID, and we'll say std string or std toString. I think it's std toString. Can't quite remember. We'll see in a minute. toString. Yeah. Now the only problem with this is that from what I can tell, is that I'm returning a reference instead of a copy. So if I do return the ID, I'll be passing out an R value, basically. And I wonder if the compiler will complain about that. Yeah, the compiler doesn't seem to complain about that, but it's a problem for me. Because I'm thinking that if you get the entity name and you want to modify it, you should be able to. Maybe what we should do is we should make this API add a name if it doesn't have one. And then it'll give you the opportunity to change the name. No, I don't like that at all. Let's make this just an std string that it returns. And then I'll change the header to match. There we go. Would STD optional STD string reference work? It shouldn't, to my knowledge, because a reference is not a... It's strictly speaking not a type. It is... you're telling the compiler that you are modifying a particular object directly instead of copying it. So while you do... I'm not sure if I'm saying something that you already know or already know better than me about, because I mentioned this before, I'm not a professional. But if you were to do like a std string reference example like this, you can't simply do this because it's not a variable. It is a reference to a string object. So whenever you do something like this, it doesn't actually allocate anything. And in fact, if I was to set this equal to, let's say, actual object equals hello. If I was to take this actual string, which is allocated and assigned to, initialized to the string hello, and I pass it in here, what's happening here is that example is essentially just a handle to this object. It is not a pointer to it, so there's no allocation happening here at all. It's just that semantically I am saying that when I do example dot whatever, it is, you can essentially equate that to saying actual object dot whatever, if that makes sense. So std optional is a template type, which takes maybe std optional, std ref, std string, or std. Yeah, I mean, you could do an std optional on the string pointer, perhaps, but the string pointer on the, if you're using a string pointer as your optional template parameter, then you should just use null pointer for your check instead of std optional. The whole point of std optional is to take a type and make it nullable, essentially. You can do things like if it has a value, then do something. So this is different than if I was just to say if the string is empty. This is actually technically semantics for has value for this. If it has a value, has value will return true. Otherwise, it's null, and value doesn't actually have any useful data in it. But yeah, I think it'd be better in this case if I was just to do this as a string, a return value. To save myself a copy, what I think I'll do is I'll do const std string reference like that. But the point is that I am not going to make it so that you can, as a programmer, call get entity name and then make a change to the name that you get back, to the reference that you get back. That's the thing that I'm not doing. If I decide to do that, if I decide to programmatically allow you to change the name of an entity, then I'm going to do that with a setter, set entity. Just because that's easier for me to implement protections on, if that makes sense. But yeah, now that we're doing it this way, yeah, we're still doing the optional type for the pool. We can basically say if there is a name, then we will return it. Otherwise, we will take and convert the ID into a string and return that. And it'll be const reference, so it won't be modifiable. The compiler won't try to modify it or allow you to modify it. And it's a reference, so it's not going to be copied, in case that string name is extensively long. I don't think const std string reference wouldn't extend the lifetime of the R value from to string. Oh, you're right about that, aren't you? Yeah. Because by the time we leave this scope, yeah. So we have to do this by copy. You're right about that. Yeah. So the first way was the better way. There we go. Which I'm not, necessarily a huge fan of copying out the string name, but you know what? I'm going to do this a different way. Instead of doing an STD optional for the entity pool elements, for the entity struct itself, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have it be an STD string, so they all have an associated string. Oh gosh, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. I just don't have a preconceived idea of what I want to do right now, and that's slowing me down. Let me make this squeal error go away. Just to make that error go away. This is an error condition, so I don't actually care what I return here. So to recap the things I want and don't want. I don't want to be an L value reference as a return value. I also don't want to require that you specify a name for every object you create programmatically. If you choose to not programmatically give your entity a name, then I want you to see the ID in the editor. Make entities have a default name like unnamed. Yeah, but that kind of tying back to the last point I just said. I wanted to display the entity ID in those situations. Out of curiosity, because I keep using Unity as a reference for this stuff, what happens if I take and rename this to nothing? It doesn't let me. So the editor in Unity doesn't allow you to delete an entity name. You have to make a name when you go to create. If I go to create empty, it just defaults it to the game object. That makes sense, and I think I'll have a similar protection for entities that you create in my editor. However, the problem extends beyond just creating entities inside of the editor, because you can also spawn entities from your game code. And I'm curious now how that would work in Unity. I'm going to quickly do a experiment in Unity, because I don't actually know offhand how Unity handles it, and I can use their choice as a data point and my choice. So let's head to Player Boy. Player Boy is the name of the character. It's just a cylinder with a red square nose on him. And I'll go into his player controller script. It's going to open it up in Visual Studio. Okay, so this is a simple character controller that I had whipped together for this little wind simulation demo. It doesn't look like I've got it doesn't look like I've got like an attack button or something like that, so let me add that. So I'm adding an input action reference in Unity, and that's a thing. Here we go. Using the new input system on Unity. Move, looks. Did it not? Oh, I didn't save and have it recompile. have it do a domain reload real quick. Okay, spawn guy, I can now add an action. Let's... Can this just be a list? It's hard to... Ugh. Alright, let's take a look at the config, input, actions. Okay, so there's an attack action, which is like the X button on the gamepad or clicking with the arrow. So that's fine. We'll bind that to player boy here. Attack will go here. Cool. And now we've got a spawn guy action. And then inside of here, spawn guy dot action dot enable, and then I have to do spawn guy dot action dot started plus equals, and then I add on spawn guy, and then I'll have to add a callback here. So let's do void on spawn guy. It takes the input action dot callback context ctx. Sorry if this is I'm now entirely off brand here, programming in C# in Unity, but this is going to be useful information. So on spawn guy, I can do I think it's like create entity or instantiate. Yeah, it's instantiate. And then I pass in the type, and then yeah. So the type is going to be I've got a enemy object somewhere. Don't I? I guess not. I guess I just don't have enemy guy as a prefab. Let's add him. This is enemy boy, the arch enemy of player boy. It's just, yeah. I'll make him red real quick just to yeah, just to make him stand out. And then I will say create prefab, which is somewhere in here. I don't see it in there, so I'm just going to drag and drop them into my prefabs here. So now I've got an enemy boy prefab. I'm going to is it copy path? Let's open up shows you how often I use Unity. I just need to know whether I just pass in the object. Okay, it's prefab utility dot instantiate prefab. That's what you do. Apparently it's in Unity Editor. Man, this is way off topic. Okay, prefab utility is an editor command, so that tells me that it's not what I want to be using. Instantiating prefabs at runtime. Okay, here we go. So I need a reference to the prefab, and then I call instantiate my prefab. Okay, that makes sense. All right, let's do that. Okay, and then in this guy, we'll say instantiate. Type will be inferred, and we'll use guy prefab at position, say player, or transformed opposition. I hope this isn't boring. This is the sort of research I should probably be doing offline. And then instantiate in world space. Yeah, true. Right? Why are you complaining? Cannot convert from bool to quaternion. Oh, there's a rotation. Why is it? Okay, that's weird. Yeah, it's giving me the suggestion to use the bool. Yeah, okay. And we'll say rotation or quaternion dot identity. Okay, so we got a spawn guy action, spawns a guy. Oh, okay. I think now that I'm looking at the code, I'm realizing now. I think what the problem is. Every entity in Unity is required to have a name, because even if you spawn the entity like from a prefab, the prefab itself will have a name on it. We could probably programmatically create a game object. And then attach components to it, but in all practicality, when you are spawning something from code, it's going to have a name. If I take and go back to the scene, and then I go and attach enemy boy to guy prefab inside here, and then hit play. And I click. Every time I click, it'll spawn enemy guy. Each one of those uses the enemy boy name as a. And that's from the prefab name. So, yeah. Okay, so that answers the question of how Unity does things. It took 20 minutes to answer, but yeah, it was worth getting the answer. One of the main differences, though, about how you instantiate objects in Enterprise is that you could clone from a prefab. That's one of the end goals, doing it the way that we just did in Unity. Make entities have a default name that is their entity ID when constructed. That, I think, would work. So it would mean that I can't do it in the initialization of the entity class. I'm still looking at the C# code. Let me close out of that. That would mean that I can't instantiate it or set it up in the entity class. Way up here at the top. But I could set it up when we go to add from the pool. Yeah, that actually makes a lot of sense. Thanks. You've been really helpful today. So the entity struct contains the string name. That used to be the hash of the name, but now I'm going to have the entity actually contain the text. And then in here, get entity name. This is no longer an optional, so we basically get rid of that. And we just return the name. Okay. And then we return an empty string if there's an error. This is a situation that shouldn't occur in a game. So perhaps, essentially what I would want to do to handle this error more correctly would be I would do an EP warn. That is something I'm able to hear. Usually pretty useless. You've been spotting the things that I should have been spotting, and I really appreciate it. You pointing out to me things like that's an unsigned and doesn't have a negative and things like that. But yeah, like what I really want to do is I want to do EP warn and then say issue a warning if entity ID is null. I just don't happen to have that style of assertion yet. This is a situation where I'd want this error condition to be checked only at runtime on a shipping game, because by then you'll have eliminated this error condition from happening. But that's a to-do list item that I have on my Trello board, so I'll come back to that later. But yeah, basically get into the name. We'll just be returning literally the name that's in here. Because we are returning a L value now, we can go back to using const string references like that. And we'll head back to the header and do that here. And yep, and here. And then when we go to create the entity, create here. Instead of doing an std optional on the name, well, we can still do an std optional as the parameter on the name. And we'll say if name, then we will do this, else we will do this. Oops. Okay, and quickly use Clang format to get that to look nicer. Okay, so are you going to complain at me still? Why are you complaining at me? Because this is an optional. Hang on a second. Right? Is that why you're complaining at me? Yeah. Good. Awesome. So if name, we will pass in the name value. If not, then we will pass in the ID string. Thanks. That was actually a really awesome suggestion. Maybe I should say unnamed. Oops, what did I just do? Unnamed, or something like that. And then append. Like that. So it'll say, when we generate a entity this way, if it doesn't have a name on it, it'll say unnamed, and then put the ID in parentheses. That sounds good to me. Cool. Yeah, and just quickly reviewing the grain sections that we have modified to make sure I haven't overlooked something. No, it doesn't look like it. Cool. Let's save that. And then, what's going on in this file? Okay, I must have accidentally deleted a line there. Good. So if we go back to the hierarchy view then, we should be able to just use get name on the entity. Let me stop and recompile and make sure that I didn't break something. Out of curiosity, what's up? What would you say your level of coding experience is? You seem to be catching non-trivial things. So it tells me that you're not just a student, or that you're a very good student. Okay, I've got an error here. Oh, this is a temporary. That needs to be a reference. So I'll need to make a const string somewhere. So let's do a static const std string error name equals. It seems like a little bit much, but yeah. It would be nice to have std unreachable of some kind. Yeah, I have a so I want to be clear that that's not what I need here. I do have something like that. I made my own macro. It's ep assert no entry. I've got two macros actually that are very similar, and they're very useful tools. You might have implemented your own. So like this will throw an assertion if the code path reaches this, and so I use this in default cases of switch statements where I expect every case to be handled, and things like that. And then no reentry is also very helpful. It prevents double execution of some code, where literally the second time this line is reached, it will throw an assertion. But that's actually not what I need here. In this section here, I don't want this to be a crash condition. I just want to generate an error that the developer will see. But in a shipping game, this should never happen. So I want to compile this away inside of a macro if there's another thing. Yeah, the reentry one is interesting. This is one where I got the idea from studying the Unreal Engine code, because this is an Unreal Engine thing, and it's kind of clever if you look at it. So the first thing that it does is this macro will define a scope, so everything that's in here is got a lifetime within the block, and then you have a static bool, so it makes a boolean that is not instantiated if this is executed within class code, and then you have s underscore line reached, the double pound sign, which takes and concatenates that with the line number. So if you are in the same file, it will differentiate based on the line number. So you can do no reentry multiple times within the same block. And then if it is set to true when you reach this code, then we have an assertion failure. So it's pretty clever. It's just basically just a way to make a guaranteed unique static boolean that flips to true when you pass by the first time, and throws an assertion if it's already true when you get back to it the second time. I find it real handy. Yeah, but for this situation, I want like a version of EP assert, which is my regular assertion macro, where it's instead of crashing upon a assertion failure, it would just be it would just issue a warning. But yeah, it's like EPW assert or EPW verify would be like what my macros would be, but I haven't done them yet, so I'll do them later. I learned C++ in theory and not in real code. Learn a lot about standard library-based coding practices, but not really write any real applications. Well, that's good knowledge to have for sure. But understanding like how and when to use a thing is about as important as getting the muscle memory to go straight to using that thing. So you do want to do some programming projects if you can. Okay, cool. So nothing's crashing, everything is back up and working. Game projects are a fun way to get started. But yeah, now that I've got that working, I can get the name of the entity. So I'm going to do that here inside of hierarchy.cpp, inside of where we were printing the name before, or printing the ID before. And that was done here, std toString eid.cstring. So instead of doing that, I will be doing ep scene manager get string or get entity name, passing in the eid, and that gives me the std string. And because IMGUI is like C++ 11, I think, based, and for some reason they like want they have like the double goal of being C++ 11 and having a pure C API. I do have to say .cstring on this to get the pointer to the first character in the data block. Cool. So now is selected equals the return result of is IMGUI selectable. The name is now the name of the entity provided by Scene Manager, and the EID selected BF is this whole thing. The R value becomes the pre-selected condition. So I suspect that this will work, but I might need to do an addition to my loading code. Okay, look at that. It says sprite 1, sprite 2, sprite 3, and so on. I'm trying to write a game engine, but the text disappeared from my screen too quickly to see it. Let me quickly modify my chat thing so the fade doesn't last. Oh, that's weird. It changed to 15 seconds. I must have accidentally switched it to 15 seconds at some point. Let's change you back to 60 seconds. Save. And now your text will remain on my screen for a full 60 seconds before it goes away. I'm trying to write a game engine, but the progress is real slow because I try to write too many things from scratch. I feel you. It's for me, it's compulsory to do everything myself. But just like figuring out which battles I want to fight and which ones I want to just move on with my life from, that's something that I very much had to teach myself, and I'm still working on it. But cool. So now we've got a hierarchy list that I for some reason can't select correctly now. Okay, I broke something. All right, we'll have to come back and see what it was I broke. But now it says sprite 1, sprite 2, sprite 3, and so on. What did I break? What could I have broken? So if I just undo the code that I did here, this is the way it was before. I'm using the toString on the EID, and I run that. I think the selection was working. File, open scene, test2d scene. Yeah, so the selection's working now. So something about changing to this caused it to break. I think it has to do with the label. I think the problem is that I have duplicate labels, and ID equals, yeah, so it's generating a unique ID from the label, from the name of the ID. So I'm gonna need to do a push pop ID to make the ID unique for each of these. So if you need to make sure the ID is unique, e.g. enclose calls in push pop ID or use ## unique ID. With this scheme, tip, pass a non-visible label. Then you can use the space to draw other text or image. Okay, I think I understand what's going on. I could either from here, I could either do like plus ## thing, and then everything to the left is ignored. Or I could wrap this whole thing in a push ID block. I think wrapping the whole thing in a push ID block is what I want to do. So that would be, I'll go to explaining this a little bit better in a minute, but I think it's like push ID. I need to push a unique identifier, and in this case I have one in the form of I, it's the unique value through our iteration. And then after we call selectable, we pop the ID. Like that. Let's try this out, see if it fixes the problem. File open scene, testing, got all our sprites, got our unique names, and selection is working correctly again. Okay, so just to kind of clarify what was causing this problem and how I fixed it. Whenever you make an element in IMGUI, it has to have a unique identifier so that you can uniquely affect each individual element as necessary, that IMGUI can, and our own game code can. But the file I loaded had a number of sprites which themselves had unique IDs inside of the scene file code, but the titles of the sprites were the same, and the text that you pass into the selectable command is hashed to generate that selectable's unique ID. So sprite 1 and sprite 1 and sprite 1, all of these sprite 1s, they were all given the same unique identifier. So in order to make them unique, I basically push a ID onto the stack below it, so that way when if I go to Tools, Stack Tool, if I go to hover this, you can see on the window in the middle here that it is the seed for the hash is basically salted. It's not actually salted, but you can think of it as salting. Its origin is 0, the hash of 0, I should say, or the hash of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So each one of these has its own index inside of the hierarchy, and that's being used to ensure that no matter what title I give the selectable, it will have a unique hash ID in the end. Or a very nearly unique hash ID. This is I am a little uncomfortable about the fact that DRM GUI doesn't handle collisions. That if you happen to have two strings that pass in, I don't think that they actually have hash collision resolution in there. It's possible they do, but if they don't, then I mean that once in 100 billion quintillion whatever, it might be possible that one of these would still have the same hash and unique ID anyway. But I'm gonna pretend like they have it fixed. They might have done. I just haven't really looked into it. But yeah, so that seems to be everything on the up and up. We now have the names of the sprites displaying in the hierarchy. We can select them all like this. What should I do next? I suppose the next thing to do would be to expose information about the selected entities inside of the inspector. It also would be nice to see the selections like highlight or something inside of the view. But I tell you what, I've been at this for 3 hours and 44 minutes. I think I'm ready to call this a stream. And then I may do some more offline work later today regarding this. I'm going to try my best to not work on weekends on this project. So if I'll probably leave this largely as you see it until I come back to stream on Monday. I think that's what I'm going to be doing from now on, is I'm going to just pretty much stream on weekdays. But yeah, I'm really glad to hear it. I'm glad that this is helping you. I am going to need to address this bug though. I am not intentionally making a whole bunch of Madelines. They should be, I basically just copied the initial row up and down a couple of times. They should totally be Hollow Knight and Link on these columns, but I'll fix that later. Take it easy, man. Have a great weekend yourself. Talk to you later.